Well, hello. It's been a big Star Wars news day today. It's 303 days until Christmas 2020, and it's been exactly 0 days since Star Wars fans have both been elated and frustrated and shocked and aggravated over Star Wars news. So I thought it was a good time to get on this evening and just go through some of the news of the day. Of course, the most current is out goes Bob and in comes Bob. So Bob Iger's out. We have a new guy at the reins, Bob Chapek, and I've heard a little bit about Bob Chapek, and just reading a little bit about him on the Walt Disney Company's webpage. They've already updated that he is the new CEO effective today, and looked into his background. I knew that he had just come from the parks division, and there's been a great deal of growth in the parks during his reign. But I had just learned that previously he served also as president of the distribution for Walt Disney Studios, and he managed the film's content distribution strategy across multiple platforms. So as I read that, I thought, well, we've got a new era of content now that's coming in via streaming services, and the delivery platform is something that is changing in media world today. And Star Wars is certainly a big part of the Disney Plus platform, and it looks like that's going to be going forward the strategy for Star Wars content. And I know we just had a release of Resistance Season 2 in Disney Plus, and we got a big announcement yesterday about a rollout of Project Luminous and what that means for the High Republic era. So just a couple things on the Bob Iger thing. We already knew that he had planned on retiring next year, 2021. And the thing that I think caught some folks off guard today is that it was just announced immediately, effective immediately. He was stepping down. Now he's still president of operations. He still has a big role there. We don't expect him to leave immediately, but it begs the question of what was the impetus for making this announcement effective immediately today without a little bit more lead time. And we don't have the full story yet about why that transpired. So in any event, Bob Iger is stepping down. We don't know what changes that might have as far as the direction, the strategy for Disney, Disney Parks, and Disney Entertainment, the Walt Disney Studios, and what that might mean to both the Marvel franchise and the Star Wars franchise that are now under that Disney umbrella. So we'll be watching that in the coming days. We'll see where it goes, and just kind of keep our ear to the ground. I know that there are different groups of the fandom that are already kind of calling for Kathy Kennedy to be the next to fall. Look, I don't know, and we know that her contract was renewed last year, and that perhaps she will kind of conclude her career. At least my guess is she'll at least follow through with the new Indiana Jones film. She has a long storied history with Indiana Jones, and I would expect to see that she'd stay through the end of that. Hey Dale, I see you're headed down to sleep, so good to see you here. Thanks for stopping by. Now just to pick up then, the other big news that came out yesterday was Project Luminous and the High Republic. What does that mean? And I went back and I've seen different people talk about, well, we don't see any release of any movie. There's no movie announcement. There's no streaming content tied to this. And they were specific to even kind of talk about that during the announcement, that There was no direct tie-in to any movie or anything like that. So there was a little bit of backlash from some of the fandom who wanted to see movies. They want to see more streaming content, and something with this big of an announcement that's had this big of a lead up time. They really wanted to see some movie tie-in there. But we know that the Project Luminous announcement that came out at Star Wars Celebration, all of that information led us to see and believe it was going to be print content. And I know that I didn't have any expectations. The fan groups that I follow, the boards that I chat in day to day, nobody had kind of anticipated anything like that. So I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't let down by it. So I don't know why there's so much outrage in certain parts of the fandom over that. That specifically that it doesn't have any movie content. I do know that up until lately, I was not a huge consumer of the printed medium. So when it came to the Star Wars expanded universe, my history going back to the 70s was was almost only in the movies and in the home videos. So when the movies were released to home, and then of course just talking among fans, I never bought the comic books. I never really bought any of the novels, but I had lots of friends who did. So I was exposed to them. I went through the list of novels that I've read. There were 9 of the original novels that I have read because friends of mine lent them to me. Of course, the one that sticks out most in my mind was the original Timothy Zahn sequel trilogy. It's what I consider to be the sequel trilogy for decades, and that was the where Palpatine had come back, and Luke was chasing down these kind of clone copies that he had of himself that he was projecting his life force into, and they had to put an end to that. That was a fantastic series, and that was almost the extent of my exposure to the expanded universe. But it did have a little bit in the games. I played the Lego games, which are not part of the extended universe at all. But again, just kind of ancillary, tied into friends that had video game consoles that played them and was aware of what was going on. Just wasn't tied into it real closely. But then I did get another series of books that were lent to me later on, and it was back in the Sith era, and I had looked it up to get the specific titles because there was a series of them, and it goes back to 2009, 2010, The Lost Tribe of the Sith. There's a series of 6 books there by John Jackson Miller, and I was lent those books. I enjoyed them a lot. So my exposure to the expanded universe prior to Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm were just those 9 books. But since then, I've consumed 21 of the novels, the newer novels from 2014 through 2019 via audiobook. I get them, check them out from the library using the Libby app, and I've enjoyed most of those. They're really good, and they add to the universe. And I can understand why so many people were tied into the extended universe through the novels that are now Legends material. And I understand that where the heartache is there. But my point on this is with Project Luminous and this period of the High Republic, it's aimed more for those people who consume the written word via comics or novels. And up until recently, I wasn't really a consumer of those. And so I can understand why the average fan, the bulk of the fandom, probably, the mass majority of the fandom won't be engaged in these books just because they don't consume them at the level that movies and things are, and until uh, around 2000, I wasn't either. So I would expect that to be the case. So I'm looking forward to it. I've been engaged with the novels, and I'm anxious to see where it's going. Another criticism that I've seen tied to the High Republic era specifically is that it's only 200 years before the Skywalker saga began, and that we know a good bit of information just through inference in the movies and in that content that we have during the Skywalker saga. Um, like we know Yoda is going to be around. He'll be an adult in some capacity. So we're expecting Yoda to be engaged at least in some ancillary material. He may not be the focus of a novel specifically, but we don't know. But we do know that Yoda's there. We do know that it's a time where the Sith were not prevalent uh, and were believed to be extinct. So we're not expecting this to be a big war between the Jedi and the Sith. It's called the High Republic because the Republic is at its kind of zenith. It's its biggest point, and with that, we infer a certain number of things. And you wonder uh, what is there to tell, right? And part of the announcement talked about some exploration. Perhaps some of the hyperspace lanes have not been fully developed or uh, put out there yet. So people may not be really aware of hyperspace lanes. It may be a lot more dangerous. They did talk about two different analogies that I found interesting in the announcement. One was that they're considered like Jedi Knights of the Round Table, which leads you back to Camelot. We did see on the whiteboard discussion the Arthurian legend kind of idea. If it's a time of uh, like the Knights of the Round Table, Arthurian legend, uh, you go back to the Dark Ages or that period in literature anyway that are all tied to the Knights of the Round Table. That leads you to invoke a certain image in your mind. The other uh, uh, analogy that was given was that they are a little bit like Texas Rangers because they're out on the frontier and it's a time of exploration and growth, and it's a little of the wild, wild west. Well, Texas Rangers, to me, aren't the same image that come to mind as Arthurian legend. So they've got two analogies here that aren't necessarily at the same level. I'm not quite sure what that means. I'm not quite sure how that is going to play itself out in the stories, in the overarching story as a whole. And I'm curious to see where that goes. The the other thing is we would expect these stories to build towards something. And they mentioned that there is an enemy, a bit of a Viking imagery. So here we get a third era brought in, right? So we've got Arthurian legend, we've got the Knights of the Round Table, we've got uh, Texas Rangers, and now Vikings. Vikings weren't the primary uh, uh, enemy or combatant with any of those other two. So how they all tie together, it'll be curious to see. We do know there are some fantastic writers involved. We know that some of the people involved in creating this content are some of the best and some who have been putting out some of the best Star Wars content in the last few years. So Claudia Gray being one of them. And I was reading through the books that I've read, and I've read a number of her books. And my favorite to this date, and I'd be curious to see what yours is. My favorite Claudia Gray Star Wars novel, for me personally, has been Master and Apprentice. That's not to put down at all her other work. Phasma was by Delilah Dawson is another really good one. But just by Claudia Gray, there's Lost Stars. that I've read. I've read Lost Stars. I've read Master and Apprentice. Going through the list, Bloodline, which was another really good one, following Leia after the original trilogy, and that was a really good book. I enjoyed it a lot. Claudia Gray, Leia, Princess of Alderaan. So we had both of those, Bloodline and Leia, Princess of Alderaan, that she wrote. Both very good books. I enjoyed them. And then, as I mentioned, of course, Master and Apprentice. So those are the ones that I've read of hers. Be curious to see what your favorites are of Claudia's. But we also have a few other fairly big names creating this content. The preview looked really interesting, where they were brainstorming, which leads to another point. And I know that there's been some controversy, and some of the fans are riled up and at arms again over words they see on a whiteboard. And I don't know about you, but I've been involved in brainstorming sessions before. And when you're brainstorming, you put ideas up there on the board, and then you revisit them later, and you start to give them merit. And things move up or down on the list. They go in and out of the list. Perhaps it evokes a discussion that brings up something else that'll go on the list. That kind of thing. So when you're doing whiteboard kind of work, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the impetus of your creation. It just helps with that creative process. Now, I will say that the one thing that has a lot of folks riled up has to do with diversity, and that shows up in two columns. So the way that I would expect that sort of shows up is over on the right hand side is a list of things that are less they're still on the table, but they're lower in the demand. The things on the left side appear to be things that have kind of bubbled up, and where it said diversity and representation on the right hand side, we see diversity on the left hand side. So it's sort of there twice. For me, I'm not so worried about it. Like many others, I don't care for forced diversity, and I understand the pushback where people are complaining about social politics being thrust into our medium and into the content. And it's something that I've dealt with for a long time. I consider myself to be conservative side of the house, and been a registered Republican, and been involved with political things when I was going to college, and was far more active younger. But I financially supported candidates and the political party, and I'm also a conservative Christian. I'm a member of a Southern Baptist church, and that's a big part of my life. Lead a weekly Bible study and a home group. So those are things that are dear to me, and I've certainly been aware of sort of the social politics that conflict with my own morals and beliefs. But that's not to say that the stories that involve those things that conflict with my own personal beliefs are bad. I'm not opposed to them including them to the degree that the story is still a good story. I'm as irritated as anybody else when they lead with the politics and it's a bad story. But I would say that what I have experienced in the novels that I've read, as well as the recent movies, as well as streaming and the Resistance show, they've all been decent stories. Some better than others. Resistance, admittedly, not the best, but it wasn't as bad as some of the stuff that I consumed back in the 80s, early 90s. So from a Star Wars content perspective, I'm generally happy. There are parts of that annoy me as much as they do anybody else. But to see diversity on that whiteboard isn't something that sends me in a tailspin off to the side. I expect there to be diversity. This content is coming from a major movie studio, And I don't know what people expect to get from major movie studios that align to your own personal political or religious beliefs. And I don't expect major studios to cater to my own personal ones. I want good stories, and for the most part, I feel like I've gotten that. So I am not at all sideways on the diversity topic being involved uh, and having it on the list, or seeing strong female leads as Jedi. I know there's been a lot of discussion about Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka is probably my very favorite Star Wars character in the whole franchise, and a lot of people share that thought with me who don't agree with me politically, but we do agree from a character development standpoint that she's fantastic. I'm also personally a fan of Rey. Her character connected to me very strongly, and in the sequel trilogy, I enjoyed watching her character develop a great deal. But that's not to say that everybody does. So that's fine. My point is as well. It doesn't bother me to see a strong female lead. I don't feel like it's forced diversity. The opportunity that we have here, going back to the High Republic era, is that we can have characters other than say Yoda, maybe two or three others that could have some overlap. Uh, we have characters to be established, brand new, not characters that get reinterpreted differently. We don't get, um, what's happened in the comics with DC and Marvel, where they've taken traditionally male characters, made them female, or traditionally uh, straight characters, made them homosexual, anything like that. So in this case, we get a chance to establish brand new characters with brand new story arcs, brand new backgrounds, nothing that ties them to something that existed in what is now Legends, nothing that ties them into anything that we had in other content. So here we get a great opportunity to establish some good characters. Other than some of the concerns that I shared about these mixed like metaphors being from Knights of the Round Table, Vikings, or the Texas Rangers. Those three don't necessarily uh, go together. But other than that concern and wanting to see how that plays itself out, I'm not upset by seeing some of the terms that I saw on the whiteboard. I wouldn't be upset to see a dinosaur. I know that was one of the things that a lot of people were like, yes, I want to see dinosaurs in Star Wars. Of course, we're going to get monsters. We're going to get large creatures. We've had those a lot. And if you've watched like the Zillo Beast that existed in the Clone Wars, great big dragon kind of thing. So it's exciting. I enjoy it a lot. There's nothing again in that whiteboard material that concerns me at all. So, well, that's my thought on the news, the topics that came out today. Again, just to kind of touch on them again, Bob Iger is changing his role effective immediately, and we got a new guy, Bob Chapek, who I learned just by reading about him does have experience with the Walt Disney Studios, and where he did manage the film's content distribution strategy across multiple platforms. So that probably leads him really well to start working with the streaming content in Disney Plus, as well as the parks. He's a people person, so interesting to see what happens over the coming weeks, months, years with Bob Chapek, and what, if any, impact that has on Lucasfilm. A little speculation about Kathy Kennedy staying on at least until the end of Indiana Jones. With her background history with that, I can't imagine her stepping out before Indiana Jones comes out. And we'll look to see what happens with her following that. If anything happens before that, it would personally surprise me. Then, of course, the big news around Project Luminous and the High Republic that we've just been talking about. So that's the news I have. Those are the topics that I wanted to discuss tonight. I don't see many folks online, but I would love to get your comments if you catch this on a replay, engage with you, and it would be fantastic to maybe have somebody on and talk with you. Somebody who has a different perspective on these things than I do. Somebody who may be a little more worried or a little more upset about some of these things, just to kind of get a different perspective. I would enjoy that a lot, especially if one of you has a big background with the extended universe prior to the Disney acquisition. As I mentioned earlier, I've only read 9 of those books, and so it'd be interesting to me to talk to somebody who is feeling a little left behind with Disney's new direction. So anyway, that's all I have for tonight. I hope that you guys enjoy this, and that if you do like this kind of content, if you let me know, like and subscribe to my channel, that would be tremendous. And I've mentioned before, I've got Santa's mailbox right behind me here. If anybody has a topic you'd like me to discuss, or a question you'd like to ask me personally, you'd like to know a little bit more, send in a letter. We'll put it in Santa's mailbox, and I'll pull them out, and we'll talk about it in a future video. Until then, may the force be with you all, and Merry Christmas, everybody. Good night.